Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here today. I've got my WR250R. This is the 2021 model, the replacement for the stolen bike. As I may have mentioned in the past, when I picked up the bike, I bought Dunlop D606s and I got Bike Biz to fit those for me because at the end of the day, I wasn't that impressed with the Trailwing tyres. They were all right in the dry, not so good in the off-road, not so good in the wet, not a heap of confidence in kind of slippery conditions. I'd ridden on the D606s in the past and been really happy with those. And that was in the dry, the wet, the damp, slippery and off-road. So I thought I'd just bite the bullet, get it done, pick up the bike with the tyres I wanted on it. There was the option to put a Pirelli front on because a lot of people criticize the Dunlop D606 front, and apparently running the Pirelli on the front is a really popular option. This is going to be my thoughts on the D606s on the road. So if you're, using your bike for mixed kind of riding, this and doing obviously a fair bit of road, this is probably going to be for you about the road side of things, and I'll do the off-road side of things separately. Obviously, on a bike like the WR250R, it's a very nimble handler, very quick turning. It can be a little bit flighty. I will say, adding those D606s to the bike, it adds ride height. So I reckon it has raised the bike by at least an inch, which if you're struggling to touch the ground, is going to be a possible issue for you. However, as long as you haven't adjusted all the ride height out of the rear, you may actually be able to lower that. One thing I really do notice with the Dunlop D606s on it is that it's quite a front-endy bike. It's a little bit down at the rear and quite tall at the front, and you do feel that in the handling. It's also a very, very aggressive handler. It falls onto the sides of the tyres very quickly, so I have changed my riding style. I keep the bike more upright. I don't kind of let it just fall onto the side of the tyre unless I'm really having a go and I really want, that kind of level of lean angle. Keeping the bike nice and upright certainly helps because you don't have quite such an aggressive turn in or like falling onto the side of the tyre, which makes it a little bit more predictable. However, I still think it's plenty of fun if you are riding it in that more aggressive manner. As you can see on the front, it is a very knobby tyre. However, in the wet conditions, in the slippery, damp conditions, I get really good confidence out of these tyres, much, much better than the Trailwings that are standard fitment on this bike. And I will say, for most of the riding I've done around town and in the city and stuff like that, I'm actually much happier on the D606s than I am on something like the Trailwing, which is kind of a more relaxed all-rounder, not as knobby or anything like that. I do think this is a better tyre, and particularly then when you get out into the nice roads. Again, much better grip on this. I haven't done that many Ks, but these really have barely worn at all. I've probably done 400 Ks on them, and they look like new. I'm pretty light on tyre wear, so that's always an advantage to me. I haven't messed around with tyre pressures. I think these are run at a fairly high pressure at the moment. But overall, I think if you're looking for a knobby tyre and you want something that you can use on the road, check out the D606s. As I said, I'll explore that Pirelli front and give my thoughts on how it compares to the D606 in the future, just because I'm quite interested. Because like I said, there's a lot of information online with a lot of recommendations, and a lot of people don't like the Dunlop's D606 front. That might be something off-road related, because on the road, I don't mind the tyres really that much at all as far as the profile or anything like that. As I said, I did change my riding style, but sometimes you just need to do that to get the most out of the bike or the tyre or whatever you fitted, and that's certainly not a problem for me. One of the things I did notice when I was on those Trailwings when I did the Nowra ride was that there were times where I definitely thought a kind of a knobbier tyre probably would have helped me quite a lot and made it a little bit, not necessarily much easier, but I probably would have had a bit more confidence to push a little bit harder. But at the end of the day, you're always making, some kind of compromise. And I think coming from road tyres, which, like 500 a set, the off-road tyres are a fair bit cheaper. So I don't mind experimenting a little bit to see what I like. And certainly there's a lot of, well-recommended options out there. So if you are riding on the road and you're worried about putting a tire like this on, I'd give it a try. I would say if you're an absolutely new rider, maybe stay on something a little bit, I'm not going to say better, but the Trailwings are a little bit easier to ride on in the dry because obviously they're not as knobby and they're kind of more of a 50-50 tire. Where I think the Dunlop D606s, if you're pushing a little bit harder and you've got a little bit of confidence, are going to be really rewarding and a good choice. As far as the tire characteristic itself, as I mentioned, these are really grippy. They have great grip in the wet and the dry. I've been really happy with that. They do fall onto the side of the tire very, very quickly if you're riding in a regular fashion. I keep the bike nice and upright, and that kind of offsets that, keeping it more towards the center of the tire. Because those knobs don't extend a huge distance out on the front, you do notice that if you ride kind of just normally, the bike falls onto the side. It's got this very instant falling onto the side of the tire, which can, I'm not going to say be dangerous or anything like that, but it can catch you out because it's a very quick transition. It does make turning, like making a really quick, kind of turn around a tight corner, very, very easy, but you may not necessarily want that. And the way you deal with that, or I'm dealing with that, is I'm keeping the bike very upright most of the time, and then I can use that to my advantage if I need to. Definitely very front-endy with this tire on. Obviously, I think that's the case with the WR250R anyway, but yeah, that's just how I'm feeling about the profile of the tires and the grip level and the knobs. I certainly don't feel like in the wet the knobs are, really impacting my level of confidence, because the compound of the tire is good enough in the wet that I've got really good grip. On some tires in the wet, you really feel the knobs and you can get like a bit of squirming and stuff like that. I haven't really found that to be the case. On the highway, I was noticing I was getting a little, like the tiniest little bit of little wobble from the front end, but I think that's actually the fact that first bit of the motorway out of Sydney is actually like this really awful concrete, and I've noticed on a lot of bikes it's not great, and I'd say it's probably a little bit better than it was on the Trailwings. So if anything, these are an improvement. There was that little bit of wobble as well on the Trailwings in the same conditions. I'll hopefully get a little bit further afield and test out the tires on kind of a more normal highway surface and see if that goes away. But that's at 110, 120, up to 130 kilometers indicated, so probably a little bit lower than the indicated figure. And certainly riding this thing at speed with those tires, no dramas whatsoever. So you can do the highway distances on the tires. How much you would wear the tires is probably another question. I'll have to do some longer runs again to test out how I go with that. Because if you're doing 500 kilometers of highway to get to some nicer roads, it could impact your tire wear quite considerably on a knobby tire like this. But I mean, so far I've done a fair bit of smaller highway sections and it doesn't seem to have had too much of an impact. Anyway, if you've got any questions, let me know down below in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. As always, stay safe out there. Thanks for watching and have a good one.